This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN and contains spoilers for Knives Out, Glass Onion, and Wake Up Dead Man.
Sir, another Ben Shapiro video has hit the Knives Out franchise.
I want to talk about Ben Shapiro's weird, bad video on Rian Johnson's recent film, Wake Up Dead Man. The first thing Ben Shapiro's video on the 2025 film Wake Up Dead Man mentions is Star Wars Episode 8: The Last Jedi. Naturally.
Alrighty folks, we're here to review Wake Up Dead Man. It's the latest Knives Out mystery from director Rian Johnson, responsible for masterpieces like The Last Jedi.
Beyond this all-too-predictable grievance signaling, Ben's video contains a number of minor criticisms, some entirely reasonable subjective judgments.
There's so many great actors here who are just thrown away.
Others Ben practically contradicts in this same video.
I will say that the movie holds your interest. It holds your interest because it moves pretty fast, but it's 144 minutes. It's 2 hours and 24 minutes. It's overlong. It's overstuffed.
But there are two main prongs to this very negative review. First, Ben claims the mystery is improperly constructed. Second, that the film is dismissive of religion. Neither prong really works, though. So today, let's get into why not. Oh, and there's also a VPN ad jammed in the middle of his video, so that's... Wait, that gives me an idea. Is this you? Oh, Pillar of Garbage is making videos on Wake Up Dead Man. That sounds cool, but I never watched any of those films, because the first one isn't available to stream in my country, the glorious American Empire. Well, if so, guess what? It's this video's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, to the rescue. Surfshark have over 4,500 servers in 140 locations. Their app virtually moves your device to anywhere in the world, so you could beam over here to UK Netflix and get your Knives Out 1 on.
Harlan told you everything.
Similarly, if you're here already and want to use the internet without sending your passport to some anonymous middleman who will definitely get hacked 1 month later, load up Surfshark and follow me to, I don't know, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Or is it Herzegovina? Surfshark's pretty top of the line as far as VPNs go. They keep no activity logs, you can choose from a variety of VPN protocols, and there are all sorts of nifty features like multi-hop, which lets you basically double up with another VPN server between you and your destination. So go to surfshark.com/garbage, that's down in the description, or use code GARBAGE at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN, and that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's risk-free. Check it out. But anyway, like I said, Ben Shapiro, two wonky prongs. Let's start with that first one.
It violates the same cardinal rule as Glass Onion. If you're going to present a mystery, like the original Knives Out, you must present the clues to the viewer such that if they watch the first 2 acts of the film, and then the reveal happens in the 3rd act, sure, they might have missed something, but all the clues are present, so you could have theoretically figured out who did what. That is not true with Wake Up Dead Man.
Now, putting aside entirely the issue of whether or not works in a certain genre should stick to the rules, an issue I think many of us may disagree with Ben on, and also putting aside that plenty of foundational mystery texts didn't follow the rules either, and that when people talk in these terms, they're really only talking about Agatha Christie-style detective fiction without realizing it, this one sounds fair enough, right? If it's true that the first 2 acts do not contain sufficient clues to lead to the conspiracy's unraveling, this would be a straightforwardly bad Christie-style mystery film from a formalist's perspective. But see, I don't think that is true. Let's work our way backwards. Starting with the actual killing blow, Nat's secret stabbing. Think about it. We never see a knife when Judd inspects the body, just blood. And me saying that would be a bit of a cop-out if it weren't for the devil head. The film explicitly draws attention to the fact that the head hadn't been attached to a knife previously.
But you know, it wasn't red though, it's red now. It's paint.
We filled it with some kind of plaster and stuck the blade in that way.
That's not to mention the finding of the red thread, which we later learn had disguised the painted head on Wick's vestments. At the very least, then, it is correct to say that the film suggests something is wonky about the devil head/knife element of the murder scene. Moreover, what else does the film tell us about the trajectory of this suspicious element?
And then after the chrism mass on Monday, Martha said she found a small broken window.
While it's unreasonable to expect a viewer to guess that Martha lied to Judd about finding the head, it does place her in that object's story. If someone was going to lie to Judd about the head, we're shown that it would have to have been Martha. Okay, but she didn't stab him, Nat did. How could we have known that? Well...
It's good, right?
It's great, actually. Especially the part where Gideon Fell walks you through the possible solutions of a locked door crime. Now, having read the fourth, I know why.
It's impossible for Wicks to have been killed from outside the room, therefore, the first person to find the corpse must have done it. The cops are wrong to assume Judd's the killer as a result of this revelation, but the revelation itself is not wrong. It can't be wrong. It is the only explanation. They just didn't know when the murder actually took place, i.e., after Judd had left the chamber. These are our conspiracy ringleaders then. But what about motive? In the second act, that is after Benoit Blanc enters the story proper, we learn about Wicks supposedly discovering a family fortune that had disappeared with his grandfather, and we learn that he'd been planning to leave the church after reacquiring it. We also know from earlier that Martha witnessed the end of Prentice's life. We also see Martha confess something to Wicks that visibly shocks him, and that this is presented to us immediately after Judd challenges her to confess her darkest secret. And we know Martha wouldn't have approved of Wicks fleeing the church with the fortune. In terms of clues to the second part of the mystery, the resurrection stunt, the film clearly tells the audience that there's some link between the fortune and this jewel case, and is similarly careful to clarify the fact that the Wicks tomb opens from inside. We know Wicks is dead, and we know that resurrection is not possible, so this can't be Wicks, and we haven't seen Samson, who we know would do anything for Martha.
I'd do anything for her.
Since before Wicks' funeral. And these are just the obvious clues. There are plenty of smaller ones, like the way that editing places Martha as Wicks' Judas.
As our Lord was, I am betrayed by Judas.
Gentlemen, may I have a moment?
Or the way Samson's TV glitches when the garage door is triggered, confirming Blanc's remote signal hypothesis. It is simply a fact that every beat and motivation and person of interest that Blanc and Martha's church hall explanations thread together are laid out ahead of that climax. And no, while the film doesn't elevate the murder-relevant details above the rest of its happenings beforehand, doesn't make it obvious who's done what and why before the reveal comes around, that would be an unsatisfying and frankly bizarre way to construct a mystery story, those relevant details are present throughout Acts 1 and 2, and some are explicitly highlighted by Wake Up Dead Man. Alright, prong the second. Wake Up Dead Man hates Christianity.
The very basis of this movie is that religion is bad unless it's basically the opiate of the masses. That's really the view of religion. Rian Johnson clearly hates Catholicism. He clearly hates religion. His basic take on religion is that religion, which sets moral standards and demands things of you, is bad. Only morons believe it. The original story is nonsense and trash. And basically, if it offers you any value, it's only the value in having kind of a good-hearted, low-level psychologist. And at one point, Daniel Craig's Detective Blanc actually says that. He says to the young priest, the reason you fell into religion is you felt guilty over the fact you were a boxer and you killed somebody in the ring, and therefore you sought a sense of absolution that you could only find in a church. And that is the message throughout the movie.
You just heard Ben chat a lot of Wham, but I think we should start by honing in on one phrase.
And at one point, Daniel Craig's Detective Blanc actually says that.
Ben Shapiro thinks that Blanc is just automatically right, that because he's the detective, that means he's also the voice of God. That's not how movies work, Ben. No, I do understand the confusion here, to a degree. Throughout the other films in this franchise, especially in contrast to obviously flawed characters like the entitled Ransom, the cowardly shitheads, the greedy Miles Bron, and here the hateful Wicks, Blanc generally remains reasonable and empathetic, objecting to the flaws of those characters, and indeed to the flaws of the systems which give them their powers. And that's woke, just like Rian Johnson. He hasn't been the only character like this, of course. The other protagonists, Marta and Helen, have a lot of overlap here, and you can look at a whole range of more or less minor characters that also act broadly like normal people. But if, like Ben, you're watching a movie solely to decode what the director wants it to say about politics, and if, like Ben, you think a movie communicates its beliefs primarily when good guy says thing or when bad person faces consequence, it is understandable how you'd get to thinking of Benoit Blanc as the voice of Rian Johnson. And I don't even doubt that some of Blanc's lines, even the ones Ben takes exception to, express things Rian Johnson thinks or has thought. But, again, he's not the only good guy. And he's not even the protagonist. Father Judd, notably, is not in agreement with Blanc. Sure, he's dismissive of some elements of organized religion.
And this church, it's not medieval. We're in New York. Costumes, all of it. It's storytelling.
And maybe he'd even admit that Blanc's psych profile of him was on point, but he clearly is of the belief that there's more to all of this than the moral absolution and the spiritual opiate Ben references.
Do these stories convince us of a lie? Or do they resonate with something deep inside us that's profoundly true?
There is a power to be found through faith, through an open-hearted, empathetic faith that's more good than all of that is bad, Judd thinks. And he's right, insofar as the film is concerned, at least. Judd and Blanc's disagreement here signals the conflict the two will engage in over the course of Wake Up Dead Man. The latter wants to put Judd's role as suspect above his role as priest, and the former fights to prioritize the cloth. That impasse is solved as Blanc realizes the importance of solving the case right, of letting Judd take Martha's confession before she dies. What Ben misses or obfuscates is that if you're trying to work out how a film feels about a topic, you kind of have to look beyond isolated moments and plot beats and consider how it ends, what's privileged and what's dismissed. And in its climax, the film privileges faith over doubt. Judd triumphs. So even if Blanc were the voice of God, the voice of Rian Johnson, that wouldn't matter, because Judd is the voice of the film. The restoring of order, which closes out the film, which in Knives Out was Marta's inheritance of the house, in Glass Onion was Miles Bron's reckoning, is the open-armed flourishing of Judd's church. We end seeing Kaylee Spaney's character getting her miracle. What do you mean the basis of this movie is religion is bad? Rian Johnson hates religion. So Ben's wrong, and he's wrong in a kind of funny way, thinking everything Benoit Blanc, again structurally kind of an antagonist in this film, says ought to be taken at face value as the moral. Basically the same thing people did with Kylo Ren back in the day, fancy that, but let's be generous. He is making this blunder in the vicinity of a real issue in the movie. Because, and sit down for this, he is right about one thing. This...
And the rites and rituals and storytelling. He didn't transform me, he sustains me every day. That's daily bread, right?
Isn't how Catholics, or at least Catholic priests, tend to understand the divine. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure some do, but broadly, the way Judd talks about Christian stories and rites and his relationship with God does lean Protestant, even evangelical. But this isn't a case of Johnson being inaccurate in some mean-spirited caricature. Again, the film agrees with Judd over Blanc. It's a case of Johnson writing about the faith that he knows. He grew up evangelical before moving away from religion. Judd's faith, the film's faith, a faith that sustains you, that is personal, that exists more in an individual bond than it does in relics or canon, that's not a watering down by Johnson of religion into nothing more than a good mindset. It's him painting a picture, again a very generous one, of the faith he grew up seeing, and of course of the faith that best ties into the wider cultural struggle the film observes. But while, yeah, as critiques, either the church should have been an evangelical one or Judd's theology should have leaned more Catholic would work just fine, there is a semantic confusion that results. Maybe for some viewers what's lost here in specificity is greater than what's gained in tone. Neither of those are Ben's angle, not even close. All this to say, Prong 2's a dud also. Ben's critique fails to cohere on either a structural or moral level. And before we end, I just have to play the note his video ends on.
And even the end of the movie makes very, very little sense. Like a tag on the end as to what happened with this fortune that's sort of at the center of all of this that's been converted into the diamond. And instead of using the diamond to do something good or worthwhile, or use that fortune to make people's lives better. The diamond is just sitting inside a statue at the end.
It makes no damn sense.
Gee, I dunno, Ben. And that's the only weird, misleading crash out any online culture war personality bearing a grudge against Rian Johnson has had over Wake Up Dead Man. Thank you, as always, to all my... Wait, why aren't the credits scrolling yet? This wasn't originally going to be part of the video. I gathered from some comments on my channel that my favourite YouTuber, The Critical Drinker, had also found the prospect of more Rian Johnson bashing too enticing to pass up on, and out of nostalgia more than anything, I had a look. When I saw that this was in the form of a live stream clip on his less viewed second channel, I thought it'd be best to just let it be, especially when I saw who the co-host was. No point kicking that particular hornet's nest, but I did watch it. And I think he throws shade at me in it.
He's just cheating. That's all he does.
Yeah, he cheats a lot.
Cheats. Ryan pulls shit like that all the fucking time in his movies, and people always excuse it. And if you point it out, then suddenly you're an asshole.
For those of you who are missing that context, what's being referenced here is not cheating. One moment in the plot of Glass Onion, the prior Benoit Blanc mystery is shown to the viewer twice. First, we see it partially, and later on, we see what we'd seen before, plus the seconds immediately prior to that first scene. The timeline in question is made clear to the attentive viewer by a very conspicuous snapping twig sound. Nothing changes, we are simply shown more, in a type of formal misdirect common to this type of detective fiction since the days of Agatha Christie. Critical Drinker alleged that this flashback constituted cheating, rewriting in a video when that film came out. My argument to the contrary formed the core of a response video I made shortly after, and for some reason that then meant I spent weeks fielding insults from the internet's least employed podcast fanbase. All this to say, turns out I'm the hornet here.
Suddenly you're an asshole.
Let's start with the idea that Ryan's camera cheats again in Wake Up Dead Man.
Rian Johnson still fucking cheats like crazy when it comes to doing his mysteries, and it pisses me off because people just give him like an absolute like free pass with that stuff. And yeah, it kind of comes across as like a bit of like an Agatha Christie Temu version.
Supposedly this is one of Ryan's standard tricks, a crutch he uses because he can't write detective stories without cheating. And while again this wasn't really a feature of Glass Onion, let's be fair, Knives Out did this, sort of. What I mean is that there are moments in the first Benoit Blanc mystery where the viewer is shown things which did not occur. But, because, and I cannot lie, it is a big but, this only happens when the film is visualizing a story someone is telling. The viewer is never misled in this way during a scene in the diegesis proper. That camera, the plot's camera, remains objective. Wake Up Dead Man is something of a departure. The new film does show us things that don't happen, sometimes as in Knives Out as a character is telling a story, but not exclusively. Think of the Reverie in which Judd hallucinates seeing and killing the risen Wicks. So, are our critical duo right? Is this not the camera cheating, even if Johnson hasn't done this before? If any moment the film presents to us can be walked back later, can have been representing a character's truth instead of the truth without our having been informed, what weight can anything prior to the reveal even have? Well, that would be a fair point if it did apply to any moment the film presents, if there were no tells at these points. But there are. Take another glance at the way Martha's version of the past looks. It isn't the same as the rest of the movie, is it? I'm not talking about the POV shots. At the corner of all these recollections, there's the same visual distortion we saw earlier produced by the church windows. This is our clue. It's a similar case with Judd's hallucinatory meeting with the risen Wicks. This is how that moment actually looks, and this is how Judd sees it. In Wake Up Dead Man, except for obvious moments of imagining, like Geraldine's pitch for Judd as killer, the camera's inhabiting of a character's perspective is always marked by overt stylization. Whether it's a non-diegetic stop-start lighting sequence or stained glass vignetting on the edge of the frame, the film indicates we're getting a distorted picture of reality by distorting our picture of reality. So not really cheating, and definitely not cheating again. Aha! No, the Critical Drinkers viewers are saying. That's all well and good, but what about the flask? The camera cheats with the flask, and there is no such stylistic distortion. See? My guys said so.
There was a shot, if you remember, when the flask is covered by the door, it only goes slightly in, and you can see there's a gap. And then when they show Jeremy Renner's POV, it's completely closed. I was like, oof.
Like,
I was saying when I was watching, I was like, because if it was slightly open, the whole audience would be like, well, wouldn't you check there? Because like, there's no other place it could be.
It's literally a blank cell of a room. There's nowhere else, yeah.
I don't know what to say about this critique, except for the fact that it simply isn't true. I went back through the film and checked. There is no moment where we're seeing from Nat's eyes an instant before Judd closes the door on the flask. I think Muller got confused here because the recap flashback in the climax doesn't replay the earlier sequence in full. It jumps from Judd finding the blood to Nat inspecting the corpse, but using our brains, we can remember the sequence of events presented earlier and recall this moment being before this one. Well, it's either that or a nitpick operating on a frankly astounding level of pedantry. There is a slight incongruity between the degree of closedness we see affected by Judd and witnessed by Nat. I can't imagine this is Muller's complaint, but just in case I am giving him too much credit, let's talk about why this is just as silly. First, this is a perceived continuity error with no bearing on the plot's functioning. Nat wouldn't get up to check behind an ever so slightly ajar door for the same reason he doesn't check behind a more shut one, and the same reason he doesn't check the main flask hiding place in the cupboard. That'd kind of give the game away. What's he gonna say to the onlookers? Don't mind me, everyone, I'm just checking for a flask that I know should be here because I poisoned it earlier? What's narratively relevant here isn't the degree of skill with which Judd hides the flask, it's that he hides it and how, and the film communicates these things clearly. Second, if you're wondering why I'm talking about a perceived continuity error, that's because it isn't really one. The door's angle doesn't only narrow between Judd's shutting of it and Nat's POV shot, it also narrows between Judd's shutting of it and the shot of him returning to hide the flask the film gives us 5 seconds later. No, it's not a question of Nat's POV being presented differently from Judd's, it's a question of there being a cut here. We see the door mostly close as Judd leans on it, and then we go to them all walking out. It is entirely reasonable to presume the door shifted another half an inch or so as he pushed past it to leave the chamber. Arguably, we see this in an earlier shot, the first time the murder is presented. See the second micro jiggle? Whichever way you slice it, then yeah, this is absolutely nothing. Ultimately then, the Ryan's camera still cheats critique is wrong on 3 fronts. 1, this type of subjective cinematography differs from the ways cinematography controls audience perception in prior Benoit Blanc films. 2, the movie indicates when we're seeing through a subject's view. And 3, no, what are you talking about? You've invented a disappearing flask. And that's maybe the main thrust of Critical Drinker and Muller's critique, but there are plenty more peculiar elements, rogue elements if you will, to their discussion. For instance, Muller suggests the film's plot is undone by the absence of a toxicology report, which should have been produced by the police, revealing the pentobarbital and putting our conspirators in the frame for Wicks's death.
I couldn't get over again just how stupid everything was, and he's just so bad at writing these sorts of things. Like, you remember in the first Knives Out, there's a big thing about getting the toxicology report because it would reveal the medication or whatever.
Sure.
It's like they got to sort that out. He just forgets the concept of a toxicology report in this film.
Yes.
That fucks the whole thing up, and he just, I don't know.
Because it's dependent then on getting like the hip flask, and it's like you understand like they would check his blood, right?
Yeah, like, and this is a drug that you can find. I was curious. I was like, does it get detected in urine or eye fluid, or you're in your bones like flesh, stomach, piss, pee, whatever? And the fucking thing said all of it. You can find it in all of it.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, they would have detected that shit, unfortunately for you.
Which makes a lot of sense if you're only familiar with the toxicology report trope via previous films in this series and maybe a few half-remembered police serials too. It makes less sense as soon as you take a cursory look into how they actually work. Let me just Google real quick. How long does a tox report take to come back? Oh, it can be weeks to months? Okay, so maybe it wouldn't have come back during the window of time our film takes place in, but sooner or later, Martha, Nat, and Samson would have been caught, right? And clearly in the first Knives Out film, they had a way of expediting the process, so, you know, there. While I'm here, does every murder get a tox report? Toxicology reports are recommended and are generally standard for homicide cases in the state of New York, but are not strictly mandatory unless the deceased had been incarcerated. Beyond this, toxicology screening happens at the ME's discretion. In the abstract, of course you'd still do one, but there are reasons you'd settle for a less intensive autopsy. For instance, if we're talking about the lab of a small police station in a tiny town over the holiday weekend and a corpse that very clearly died from a huge stab wound. But say you did one anyway. The details of forensic pathology procedure do vary across the US and the world, but according to at least one US-based forensic science website on the first page of Google results, barbiturates, like, say, pentobarbital, are not screened for in standard post-mortem toxicology. Yes, you would be able to see it in blood, urine, or whatever else, but you'd have to test specifically for it. And maybe you would in a situation where cause of death were less clear-cut, but again, while there are a lot of question marks around the Wicks case, cause of death is explicitly not one of them. So while yes, as Mauler will go on to suggest, the conspirators could have simplified the murder by just poisoning the flask.
Also, the plan to kill him was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious.
So, it's so absurdly overcomplicated when it's like there's way easier ways to get rid of someone if you really want to.
They have a doctor, they have access to a flask. Just poison him, you fucking idiots.
That would have resulted in an intensive toxicology report. The big bloody knife plunged into Wicks's side is at once a murder weapon and a misdirect. It is the thing that covers the conspiracy's tracks. That's why it happened this way. Or that's part of the reason, at least. Put a pin in that. It's also worth pointing out that the bones of this scheme, regardless of far-fetchedness, have a lot of mystery pedigree. A book that gets a lot of play in this film is John Dickinson Carr's classic The Hollow Man. It's the book that furnishes Blanc and Geraldine with their locked-door crime solution possibilities. Also, we will go on to learn it's the book that birthed Martha's plan. Let's quote another of Gideon Fell's ventured explanations. The victim is presumed to be dead long before he actually is. The victim lies asleep, drugged but unharmed, in a locked room. Knockings on the door fail to rouse him. The murderer starts a foul play scare, forces the door, gets in ahead, and kills by stabbing or throat cutting, while suggesting to other watchers that they have seen something they have not seen. Those of you who have seen the film may recognize this as the core of Martha and Nat's plan. All this to say, if you think this movie's plotting is stupid, hey, maybe you just don't like mystery fiction. Now, I'm sure some of you will think that by making so much of Mauler's points, I'm going for low-hanging fruit. Since this was originally a live stream discussion, not a carefully scripted review, you'd be forgiven for thinking these are just stray, unconsidered thoughts on his part, especially since he doesn't seem crystal clear on the mechanics of the murder itself.
We'll spike it with something that'll knock him out and then stab him with a remote-controlled squib dragon. I was just like,
no, they don't even stab him with that. That's just glued to his back, the back of his robes.
That was my initial impression too, but this is not the case. As he will go on to mention, he's already chaired a 6-hour-long analysis, a complete breakdown of the film on his podcast. And it's only after hearing Mauler perform all this well-rehearsed negativity, seeing the cue card, if you will, that Critical Drinker shifts gears from a lightly negative tone.
You know, it had some moments. I thought it was fun enough to keep me invested in it at least, so that was something.
To a total bashing.
It's weird, right? Because I feel like the more I'm talking to you about it, the more I'm like, no, this really was shit.
Bro, you should watch the episode. I got plenty more complaints about how fucking stupid the movie is.
So I feel like pulling Mauler up on stuff like the above is fair game. And on the rest of it too, because there is more. There's a spectacularly weak attempt at woke spotting, where the lads attempt to point to goodness versus badness in the film as depending on race and gender before immediately contradicting themselves.
Big thing that spoils his movies ahead of them being shit anyway is this ancient history as part of this story. There's this woman who she was a psycho and she defiled the church. Rah, 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 rah. I was watching with a friend and we were like, so she's a good guy.
Yeah,
this is a lie. And then they're like, here are our suspects. One of them is a girl in a wheelchair. It's like, she'll be good. There's no way he's going to make her evil.
One's a black woman. Yep, she's
No way
obviously
she's
going to be
evil.
good. I was actually shocked that he made a mixed race guy bad. Genuinely shocked. I was like, whoa, that's dangerous ground there.
Seeming not to even realize that both of the film's main goodies are white guys. And I'm rather fond of this complaint too.
His cases solve themselves. He doesn't do shit. Ridiculous. The fucking narrative play of having him, I need you to write out your entire life story, and then I'm going to detect one line instead of you just telling me what happened.
Getting Judd to write out his story does push the plot forward. It reveals the presence of the flask. God, that flask is really tripping these guys up, huh? More than this, though, it also kicks off the subplot. Because, sure, Judd could have been fully honest from the off, but he doesn't know he's a character in a mystery film that'll end when the case gets cracked. He thinks he's a person, with a personality and values. Values that just might clash with those of the mystery genre, and with that genre's textual avatar, Benoit Blanc. Yes, they're both goodies. Yes, they're both looking for truth, but what if Blanc's style of truth isn't enough for Judd? What then? Isn't that an interesting question for a film in this genre to explore? We talked earlier about the way Judd eventually wins this clash, that his values are affirmed over the detective story orthodoxy Blanc starts off embodying, and the way Blanc trips Judd up with the flask via storytelling is the first step along this storyline. And on that note, it's high time we took the pin out of Martha's elaborate conspiracy, because she chose the locked room stab mislead in order to cover the conspiracy's tracks, yes, but that wasn't the only reason her plan tended toward the theatrical.
There's a million ways you could kill him, like, way more easily.
Have, what's he called? Hayden Church. Just have that character, Samson or whatever, have him just go, there's something you've got to see out in the woods. You've got to see this. It's insane. And he goes, okay, go out in the woods, hit him on the head with a shovel, bury him.
Yep.
That's it.
Martha's plan is as much a ritual as it is a murder.
Raise Wicks up as a miraculous risen saint, a symbol that would save my church.
I have an entire video about this, so go watch that if you want more than the nutshell version, but a stabbing, a poisoning is tawdry, prosaic. An impossible death, a smiting followed by an equally impossible rebirth, that's a miracle. It's another act of storytelling aimed at the church, aimed at the town, a reenacting of the Easter Rising, mythic in scale. I'm not shocked that this angle, the why behind the what, doesn't factor into the analysis of your critical drinkers and maulers. Theirs is a school of media content that intentionally privileges the plausibility and mechanics of plot over any of that frou-frou stuff like meaning or context, but the fact that they always do this doesn't make it any less silly, because it's the same issue displayed by Ben, why doesn't Judd just spend the diamond, is he stupid, Shapiro. A refusal to engage with a film's themes does not negate their presence, nor the way those themes come to bear on the logic of the plot via characters and their motivations. It is not a sin to write characters who are characters, instead of maximally logical vectors of self-interest, characters who believe things and see their world from a certain perspective. No, that's called fiction. And again, as we saw with Ben's review, the problem with hyper-focusing in on a handful of individual plot beats you didn't like very much, beyond the fact that you may misremember them and look kinda silly in the process, is that the soul of a movie like this lives in the big picture, the sweep, the way all those details come together and relate to one another. One final example?
All this effort to say Glenn Close's character, you know, she's a broken woman because of the horrifying systems that she was a part of, the religion that was misogynist and hateful turned her into this, and that she had a chance to have a reprieve, and that's what the best parts of religion are all about. And it's like, okay, but not Josh Brolin and not Jeremy Renner. Fuck those guys.
No, they don't deserve that.
Yes, if we're viewing the movie as a sequence of disconnected things that Rian Johnson wants to show us happening, wants us to take pleasure in witnessing, if we're viewing it as essentially a moral political code, then sure, this gripe makes a lot of sense. But if we link those things back up, reseat them in their plot and their setting and their medium, if we view the movie as a movie, then maybe the point isn't that Martha deserves grace but Wicks didn't. Maybe it's that Judd would have given Wicks and Nat that reprieve. Maybe Martha as woman isn't ontologically good where Wicks as man is bad. Maybe there is more complexity to it than that. Maybe the point is that Judd chose grace for the guilty and Martha didn't, and maybe she still deserved it despite that mistake. And maybe, no, definitely, the point is... At the climax of Wake Up Dead Man, Blanc moves to meet Judd. We talked about that earlier, but what we didn't touch on is how weird that is, within the context of the Knives Out films, that is. Benoit Blanc has never had an arc like this, has never changed before. Blanc has always been a part of the furniture, a conduit for stories, for arcs. Wake Up Dead Man doesn't do a full 180 here. After all, there is undoubtedly some strategy in his decision not to reveal the truth. Things do wrap up more cleanly if Martha confesses herself, but he's Benoit Blanc. He's Benoit Blanc with the answer, with the only possible answer. Either way, Judd will be exonerated. Either way, things will end up the same. Damascus is not a moment of pure strategy. It is, at least in part, a submission to Judd's priorities. So as with the embrace of a stylized, subjective perspective, this is the first time it's been like this. These were the best choices for this story, so things changed. And things don't always change. This will probably turn out to be a fairly inflammatory video. Many of you may well object to me putting The Critical Drinker and Ben Shapiro in the same conversation, but just know that I'm not the only one putting them in the same conversation. They both have too. Literally. A few times. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. They discuss similar topics in similar ways for similar audiences. As popular conservative culture war mouthpieces, both have spent years playing more or less conscious roles in the laundering of radical ideology and in the manufacturing of consent for performatively anti-woke far-right politics. That might sound like a stretch to some of you, at least with regard to folks like The Critical Drinker, but his Wake Up Dead Man coverage does provide an example of this, a sort of microcosm for the dynamic observable throughout his content.
Do you detect the real bitterness in Rian Johnson towards anyone who's critical of him or whatever?
Yeah.
Or I think anyone who perhaps sits to the right of Vladimir Lenin politically, because holy fuck, he lays into that hard in this movie.
Wicks is not simply a right-wing priest. He is explicitly, textually, a virulently misogynistic,
The shameful sin of the harlot whore.
Christian nationalist,
Our rightful place as the rulers of a Christian nation of faith.
calling for violence. He is not simply a conservative rightward of Lenin. All he's missing is a pointy hat. There are plenty of other Catholics in this film who do not share these traits, other priests too. This is extremely clearly not what Rian thinks of all religious people, and these guys know that. These guys watched the film too. They heard those lines. They choose to downplay and normalize the type of hate-mongering that in days gone by would have been shunned by anyone other than extremists across the aisle. This sort of equivocation, the refusal to disavow the hate-monger, indeed the identification with him simply because the movie's by a woke lib, might feel fair and balanced on a gut level, but by staying put, a side is taken. And the staying put is key here. Stasis is key. The first thing Ben Shapiro's video on the 2025 movie Wake Up Dead Man mentions is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Channels like this not only produce grievance-based film content around the same targets year after year, they do so in the same formats with the same tricks. No, guys, he still isn't cheating. The clues are still present. It's the same playbook. It has been since 2018. Stasis is key? There's a moment in Ben's review I didn't pick up on earlier that gave me pause.
Josh Brolin's Wicks, he's supposed to be bad because he's a right-wing priest. That's why he's bad.
Wicks is bad because he's right-wing, apparently. Doubtless this is an oversimplification, but I think it might be more than that, too. Because doesn't that sort of get Wicks backwards? Is it not that he's throwing weight behind right-coded projects because of a badness, or let's say a flaw that goes back to his childhood environment, his grandfather's misogyny, the way Wicks is taught to hate his mother? There is something of a chicken and egg dynamic here, I think, and within that, the suggestion that it isn't that simple, of cycles that spin and spin and spin. But if you flatten the medium like this, perform the cinematic equivalent of pausing a cartoon and critiquing the smear frame, character is X because I think writer thinks Y, if you arrest the plurality of meaning inherent to film like this, you can make anything say anything. But to do that, you have to stop it dead. And again, I think this is a hard film to do that with. We talked earlier about where, if anywhere, Rian Johnson's own voice or own views are expressed within Wake Up Dead Man. If we should look to Blanc here, how do we reconcile that with the fact that he moves and Judd doesn't? That in the eyes of the film, at least, he was wrong. I'm reminded of something the novelist Haruki Murakami wrote about his shift into third-person narration. By branching out, I am able to divide myself. So what if Blanc is only a part of Johnson? What if, in this film, Blanc houses Johnson's skepticism and Judd houses his hope? Well then, the contradiction disappears. Hope? This hope beats doubt, a hope that is active and searching. It moves to meet a moving world. I don't know how translatable this is to our political struggle, and I don't know how far it was ever meant to be. But if you asked me to describe Wake Up Dead Man in a single word, I do know that it wouldn't be static. It wouldn't be flat, or passé, or tired. And I think that's why responses to the film like the ones we've covered today feel so ill-matched, because while you're there, where you were before, working from the same blueprints, panning the same dirt, setting the same traps again and again, the movie, the series has kept going. We've kept going. The answers are this way. What are you still doing over there? Thank you for watching, and thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. As always, more stuff coming soon, some details on which you can find for free on the channel Patreon, linked below. Also up there, behind a very short paywall, was an early, ad-free, and slightly longer version of this video that you could have been watching a few days ago. So if you don't want to miss out in the future, think about signing up. Huge shout out to everyone who's done so already, especially Birding Baddie, Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Deathstroke HQ, Harry Price, Kwang Yu Liu, Nothings, Something Something Capitalism Bad, Stephen Van Doren, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. See ya.